Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first post-recess hearing of the Budget Committee. This one is a little bit unique in that I am co-chairing it with Senator Padilla, and it will be, I don't know if co-ranking member is a verb, but our distinguished ranking member will be supported by Senator Lee as a opener also. So we will have, rather than the usual 2 opening statements, we will have 4 opening statements. And I want to thank Senator Padilla for his emphasis on this issue and his support for this hearing. This morning, we discussed the role that immigration plays in driving our economic growth and strengthening our global competitive advantage. Ahead of this year's House-driven default crisis, Ranking Member Grassley called on both parties to get serious about the budget, deficits, and debt. As this committee has repeatedly shown, we have levers at our disposal to reduce the deficit and, more importantly, to reduce the debt-to-GDP ratio. For example, we can increase revenues by fixing our corrupted tax code, and we can avoid future increased expenditures and decreased revenues by investing now in climate change protections. Showering tax cuts on the wealthy, on big mega donors, and on big oil are, in my view, not serious pathways to fiscal responsibility. Today's hearing discusses a powerful tool in our toolkit, and that is immigration. Economists and experts agree that expanding lawful immigration pathways to the U.S. will grow our workforce, our productivity, and our economy. Reforming our decades-old immigration laws is long overdue. Congress has been trying to reform the system for the entire time that I've been in the U.S. Senate. In the 11 years since creating the DACA program, we have not yet passed permanent protections for dreamers, whose fate now lies with the Supreme Court. Real human consequences to this delay play out in the lives of immigrants, their families, employers, and communities. People are frightened and people are suffering. This includes people seeking refuge and safety. This includes many essential workers. And as one of our witnesses today will testify, this includes people who grew up here, built a life here, and then had to give it all up when our immigration laws failed them. There are also serious economic consequences. A landmark study on the economics of immigration by the National Academy of Sciences found unequivocally that immigration is integral to America's economic growth. At all skill levels and at all education levels, immigrants boost our economy. Immigrants are about 80% more likely to start a business than those born in the U.S., and immigrant entrepreneurs create jobs for U.S.-born workers. More than 1 in 5 small businesses in the U.S. is immigrant-owned, and more than 40% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. Immigrants are also more likely to hold patents and fuel innovation nationwide. Notably, innovation accelerates among U.S.-born and immigrant workers alike when immigration increases. Further, undocumented workers help fuel our economy. Providing pathways to lawful immigration and citizenship is not only a moral imperative, it is an economic one. An estimated 3/4 of all undocumented immigrants were essential workers during the pandemic. In other words, they were heroes. Their economic contributions would be even greater and their risks of exploitation and labor abuse greatly reduced if lawful status were accorded to them. The Center for American Progress estimated that creating pathways to citizenship for dreamers, TPS holders, farm workers, and essential workers would boost U.S. GDP by $1.7 trillion over 10 years and would create over 400,000 new jobs. Providing lawful status to undocumented workers also benefits U.S.-born workers by increasing worker power and reducing wage exploitation. A rising tide lifts all boats. Economic growth is a product of labor force growth and productivity growth. Immigrants are important to both, and they have become essential to meeting existing labor needs and to the continued health of our social insurance programs, as the CBO director testified in July. If 2 million more immigrants came to the U.S. each year, we could reverse our predicted population and productivity decline. And we could nearly double GDP to $47 trillion by 2050. Compared to a GDP of only $33 trillion in a low immigration scenario. If we are serious about global economic competition with China, then we need to welcome immigrants. U.S. immigration hurdles are motivating businesses to hire workers to facilities abroad instead of in their U.S. facilities. The talent pool is global, and America needs to attract global talent to the U.S. Experts have warned that without boosting legal immigration significantly now, the U.S. will sacrifice its position as the world's largest economy by 2030. Our outdated and broken immigration system is harming people, and it is also harming our economy and affecting our budget. Repairing it will expand our economic potential and strengthen our global competitiveness. We can fix this, and we should try. I turn it over now to Ranking Member Grassley, whose opening statement will be followed by that of Senator Padilla, whose opening statement will be followed, if he is present, by Senator Lee. Senator Grassley.
Yeah. Before I go to my statement, I should probably make clear, because my statement might sound like I have great disagreement with you, but everything you said about legal immigration, I want to say that I associate myself with your remarks, and the only thing is, what keeps us from getting there is more of a political issue that I think I want to address.
And indeed, you and I, and particularly Senator Graham, have been heavily involved in Judiciary Committee immigration work for many years. So, yeah, I agree with you there. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Over the August break, I completed my annual tour of Iowa. For the 43rd straight year, I held at least one Q&A meeting in each of Iowa's 99 counties. These meetings allow me to hear directly from my fellow Iowans about what's on their minds, and as an example of listen to people's what's on their minds, the father of Mr. Van Beek, who's here as a witness, came to my Columbus Junction meeting maybe about 2 or 3 years ago and talked about the very same issue that I presume Mr. Van Beek will speak to us about today, although it'll probably be a little more general of a statement. Immigration is an issue on the minds of many Iowans, specifically illegal immigration and securing our nation's borders. And when our borders are not secured, I think the sovereignty of any nation is compromised. Every night on our TVs, we see immigrants waiting across the Rio Grande. We see immigrants sleeping on streets in New York City, and reports of similar situations in Chicago and Los Angeles. As he criticized the Biden administration, the Democrat mayor of New York City recently said this crisis will cost New York $12 billion and destroy the city. In fact, just this Saturday, New York mayor warned all city agencies could see their budgets cut by 15% due to an increased cost of migrant crisis. So even Democrats who have actually deal with the crisis admit legal immigration is a huge cost to taxpayers and society. And it seems to me I don't hear from those same mayors that it'd be a good thing if the president would solve this problem at the border by securing the border, because President Biden's lax immigration enforcement has contributed to rising crime in communities across the country. Gangs at the southwest border recruit migrants to bring drugs into the United States. Those on terrorism watch list have been apprehended at the border, and who knows how many have evaded apprehension. In Iowa, Sarah Root was killed in 2016 by an undocumented immigrant driving drunk. New York City's budget cuts could result in no overtime for city police and put public safety even more at risk. No one can place a cost on the lives and families that have been destroyed by criminals entering our country illegally. These are very real reasons the Biden administration needs to step up and control our borders. Iowans tell me they're sick and tired of the administration not enforcing our immigration laws. We need real reform and consistent enforcement of our existing immigration laws. President Biden took an oath to enforce our nation's laws, and yet he's not doing that on the subject of immigration. We're a nation of immigrants. We're the most liberal on this issue of any nation on the face of our globe. America welcomed roughly 1.5 million legal immigrants in the year of 2022. These folks follow our immigration laws to their benefit and to their benefit as well. Businesses and our economies benefit from a stable and legal workforce. Our communities benefit from the economic contribution of legal immigrants, and immigrants benefit from the opportunities and protections offered when they're here legally. We all benefit when state, federal, and local resources are not drained dealing with people entering our country illegally. No one benefits from mismanaged borders, policies that incentivize illegal immigration, and poor implementation of legal immigration programs. My Democrat colleagues argue that we need to increase immigration to address a labor shortage. Well, one reason we have a labor shortage is that this administration's anti-work agenda. A recent study by the Foundation of Government Accountability found President Biden's expansion of government program benefits has caused 2.4 million Americans to leave work. We need to bring Americans back into the workforce and reform existing programs before we expand immigration. This morning we'll hear from Mr. Robert Rector. He's tracked the cost of illegal immigration for many years. He'll discuss how Biden administration mismanagement of our immigration system has imposed significant financial costs upon our towns, states, and federal governments. His testimony will make it clear that relaxing our immigration requirements is unsustainable and the wrong direction to take. We'll also hear from Dr. Ron Hira about the fraud and abuse of the current H-1B visa program. His message will be, we know the steps needed to improve our current legal immigration programs, and we must take those steps to protect American workers and foreign-born workers as well as our economy. During this past year, Senator Durbin and I reintroduced the bipartisan H-1B and L-1 Visa Reform Act to reform and close loopholes in the H-1B and L-1 visa program. The H-1B and L-1 visa program creates a pathway for U.S. companies to recruit highly skilled non-citizens when there is a shortage of qualified workers in the country. Unfortunately, these programs are being abused, mismanaged by a number of companies who displace U.S. workers. Our legislation, meaning Grassley-Durbin legislation, would reduce fraud and abuse in our immigration system, provide American workers protections against being displaced, and protect foreign workers from being subjected to artificially depressed wages and poor working conditions. Before we entertain any increases in these programs, they have to be fixed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Grassley. And now I will turn to Senator Padilla, who, as I indicated in my early opening remarks, was a terrific support and long instigator for this hearing, and I look forward to his opening remarks, and then we'll turn to Senator Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Whitehouse. Always happy to instigate. Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. I want to thank both of you for inviting me to help co-chair this hearing on the role that immigration plays in driving economic growth and ensuring that our nation stays competitive on the global stage. And I'm glad to be here today to learn more about the economic challenges caused by our outdated and broken immigration system and the steps that we might take, that we should take, to make our system and our country stronger moving forward. Now, even in the year 2023, it's no exaggeration to say that America remains a shining city upon a hill to countless people around the world who dream of a better life. But make no mistake, it's not just immigrants who rely on the United States of America to achieve a better future. America, too, relies on immigrants. Our economic success will continue to depend on immigrants and all that they contribute to our nation. Yet for all that immigrants contribute, Congress has failed to pass significant immigration legislation to update our outdated immigration system in over 3 decades. As the senator from the state that is home to more immigrants than any state in the nation, and yes, a proud son of immigrants myself, I know personally the benefits that immigrants bring to our country and to our communities. And as chair of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, I just want to share with my colleagues on this committee that we've now had 6 hearings examining the vital roles that immigrants play in our communities, from members of the military to essential workers on the front lines of the pandemic and long before then, to entrepreneurs and more. But over the course of those hearings, too many times we've heard the devastating impacts that our outdated laws have had, the impact that growing visa backlogs have had on families, on students, on workers seeking to immigrate to the United States. That includes U.S. citizen family members who are separated or kept apart from loved ones because of our outdated immigration system. Here's what we've learned. Every day that we fail to reform our immigration system is another day that we're holding back the economy, and another day that our economic competitors around the world rise. According to Forward.us, meaningful immigration reform could bring 3.2 million new jobs to the United States over the next decade and add $1 trillion to our economy. And we'll hear today, part of that reform means facilitating immigration of healthcare providers like physicians and nurses. Today, the United States is facing a dire healthcare workforce shortage, including a projected shortage of up to 124,000 physicians by 2034. But luckily, we know that immigrant healthcare workers can help fill this gap. And we know it because, in many ways, they already are. Immigrants already write our prescriptions. They care for us at our bedside. And very often, they're the cornerstone for rural and low-income community access to health care. Yet backlogs in processing green cards, along with annual caps to employment-based visas, mean we can't meet the high demand for healthcare workers in the United States. For my colleagues across the aisle, let's be clear, this is lawful migration, existing programs. We're talking about addressing backlogs. Now, we can't meet our needs unless we act. Strengthening our economy also means helping immigrants who hope to make a career for themselves here in STEM fields, filling a desperately needed gap in our STEM workforce. It means helping potential entrepreneurs and business owners, yes, investors, who, whether because of restrictive student or employment-based visas, are forced to leave the country or never get a chance to contribute to our economy. And it means passing a pathway to citizenship for long-term undocumented individuals like dreamers and DACA recipients, hundreds of thousands of young people who are already home in America, but who can't pursue the same opportunities as their peers because of their status. How can we live up to our full economic potential when all these people are denied a secure place in America? Let me be further clear about this. The need for immigrants in our economy stretches far beyond just the healthcare examples that I've given or the STEM fields examples that I've given. They're essential in every essential industry, from agriculture to education, construction, food processing, and more. In fact, we recognized this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Nearly 1 in 5 jobs deemed essential by the United States government was held by an immigrant. Yet these same workers deemed essential to keeping our country running are denied permanent protections. They're left to live in limbo. That's fundamentally wrong. And it's not just a moral failure, it's a national economic weakness as well. But it's indicative of the larger problem that we have that we'll try to square off with today. We have the solutions to grow our economy and be more competitive on the world stage. Time and again, the solutions have been there, but politics has kept Congress from taking the necessary actions. To fail to act again would not just cause the United States to fall behind here at home, we would continue to lose our competitive edge globally as well. So we must come to the table, work to bring justice and dignity back to the immigration system, provide stability for immigrants living here in America already, and invest in the future of our economy. That may seem like a lot to ask, but failure is not an option. So I challenge all of us here today to listen to the testimony of our witnesses, look past the partisan talking points, and let's get to work. We can do this. We need to do this. And thank you again, Mr. Chair, for having this hearing today. And thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Whitehouse and Ranking Member Grassley, for the opportunity to address the committee with a few opening remarks at today's important hearing. America is a generous country, welcoming to immigrants. It always has been. I hope it always will be. My home state of Utah is an excellent example of that generosity and the welcoming spirit that's come to typify America. Tragically, as much as we would love to, America cannot be the safe harbor for every desperate, destitute, and wandering soul in the world. Under this administration, the bounds of American generosity have been more than tested. They've been assaulted, stretched to the breaking point. The costs of an unsecured border and unprecedented illegal immigration have been both stunning and debilitating. The cost of the border crisis is impacting every single American. It isn't just placing unprecedented strain on our federal budget and the budgets of border states. Governors across America and mayors of cities large and small are feeling the burden of an unprecedented 3 million people entering this country illegally and relying almost exclusively, in many instances, on taxpayer resources for their support. But first and foremost, we must acknowledge the human costs of our unwillingness to close our border and enforce our laws. People are dying in cargo containers. Children, including babies, are being trafficked as commodities, as the price of admission into our country. Women and children are being violated, trafficked in the human sex trade. Violent drug cartels, meanwhile, are being enriched and becoming increasingly powerful as they traffic untold amounts of fentanyl into our country. Over 100,000 people have died from fentanyl overdoses during the last year alone, and there's no dispute about where the fentanyl is entering our country. It's coming through our southern border. An estimated 196 Americans are dying every single day from fentanyl. As the Washington Post pointed out, that's the equivalent of a fully loaded Boeing 757-200 crashing and killing everyone on board, day after day after day, every day of the year. Now, if Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden had a Boeing 757 crashing every day in American airspace, everyone would be understandably outraged, calling for the resignation of both officials. Not only is the fentanyl streaming through our border, costing American lives, but it's also placing an unsustainable burden on our healthcare system. Now, while the human costs are certainly the most significant, they're not the only costs associated with our porous border. We're experiencing unprecedented strain on our federal, state, and local resources. Now, one border town, Yuma, Arizona, spent more than $26 million to provide medical care for immigrants crossing into the United States just last year. About 27% of the immigrant patients going there have come there specifically to deliver their babies in the United States. According to news reports, one doctor at Yuma Regional Medical Center said, quote, "The population of Yuma is 100,000. We've had 300,000 people cross the border in the last year, and we're the only hospital that they've come to." I don't know how anybody can look at that and say this is a fair setup. He says the medical facility will never fully be able to recover financially. Not only does this crisis drive up costs for the only paying patients, generally American citizens and residents of Yuma, but it's also depleted the hospital's resources and its ability to care for its own residents. The doctor mused, quote, "Migrant patients are receiving free care and they have no ability to pay. We have no ability to bill anyone. We don't know their financial destination, their final destinations, and we don't know anything about them. We cannot provide completely free care to the residents of our community, so the situation is simply not fair and concerning to them." In El Paso, CNN reports, about 2,300 illegal aliens are living on the streets around two shelters downtown. Now, what happens to the citizens of El Paso when they need a helping hand? I guess you have to wait in line behind the 2,300 immigrants. But it's not only the border towns that are suffering from this deluge of illegal immigrants. Democratic mayors across the country are declaring states of emergency because of the record number of dependent migrants flooding into their cities. Two of America's largest cities, New York City and Chicago, are now experiencing a small fraction of the unsustainable situation that border states and cities deal with every day. And their elected officials aren't holding back when it comes to complaints. Look, illegal immigration has occurred in the United States. It's occurred for a long time, and it started happening well before the Biden administration, to be sure. But make no mistake about this. The unprecedented surge in illegal border crossings and the ongoing crisis of the last 2.5 years is now being felt everywhere across the country. This is not an accident. This is the result of deliberate, willful non-enforcement of our immigration laws, unlawful uses of parole, and our unwillingness to correct the perverse incentives built into our immigration laws. I've introduced the Stopping Border Surges Act, which would go a long way toward closing those loopholes. But following the laws correctly, the laws that are already on the books, would be a great step in the right direction. And we could stop most of this from happening right now if we just enforced the laws. All Americans want America to be a place of refuge, but Americans of all leanings recognize that the ongoing crisis on the southern border is threatening our ability to give relief to true asylum seekers and also to take care of our own people and to provide an environment where people can live in a place of peace and law and order. It's my hope, my wish, my prayer that the Biden administration will reverse course on this unacceptably abysmal record of border enforcement and start enforcing the law to bring an end to the crisis. The cost of the Biden-Mayorkas border policies are just way too high for us to pay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Lee. Our first witness is Dr. Britta Glennon, a professor of management at the Wharton School of University of Pennsylvania and a faculty research fellow of the National Bureau of Economic Research. Her research examines human capital and innovation with a particular focus on how immigration policy affects business, decision-making, and performance. Dr. Glennon, welcome. Your testimony will be followed by that of David Beer. He is the Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. Mr. Beer has over a decade of experience in immigration policy, and his work has been cited widely, including by multiple appeals courts and the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Beer was previously a senior policy advisor for Idaho Congressman Raul Labrador, where he helped draft immigration legislation. Mr. Beer, thank you for being with us today. We'll also hear from Lawrence Van Beek. Mr. Van Beek is a graduate of the University of Iowa with a degree in computer science and currently works as a software developer at Integrated DNA Technologies. In 2022, he was forced to self-deport and leave his family and home of nearly 2 decades. Due to his talents and employers' needs, His employer has him working now from overseas. His story exemplifies how forcing American-raised and educated children to self-deport hurts America's communities and its economy, and I would add, makes no sense. Mr. Van Beek, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Then we have Dr. Ron Hira, an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Howard University in Washington, D.C., who has written widely on offshoring and highly skilled immigration. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Robert Rector, who is the Heritage Foundation's Senior Research Fellow in the Center for Health and Welfare Policy. His research focuses on welfare and immigration reform, and he has previously published analysis on the fiscal costs of immigration. I welcome all of you. Dr. Glennon, please proceed. 5-minute statements, please. Your full testimony will be made a matter of record.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The primary point I want to make in my remarks is that the existing academic research strongly indicates that immigration leads to large gains in productivity, innovation, and business and economic growth. As a result, the current outdated and comparatively restrictive U.S. immigration system is putting the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. When we restrict immigration, we lose, and other countries gain instead. Our restrictive immigration policies have already motivated companies to move jobs and investment out of the U.S. For example, my own work shows that the 2004 reduction in the H-1B visa cap led U.S. multinational companies to move tens of thousands of jobs to the subsidiaries that they operate abroad, both at existing subsidiaries and by opening brand new ones. In other words, the U.S.'s restrictive immigration policies sent jobs and investment to other countries, especially China, India, and Canada. In contrast, other research has shown that an influx of migrants and refugees leads to firm-level onshoring of investment. Policymakers should consider that restrictive immigration policies, including those implemented to protect U.S. jobs, are actually likely to have the unintended consequence of pushing U.S. business investment abroad. But our failure to reform outdated immigration laws is not only causing us to lose workers, we are also losing startups. As one example, my work has documented that immigrant would-be entrepreneurs in the U.S. are going to Canada instead to form their startups because there's no startup visa in the U.S. and thus no clear legal path for immigrants to found a business here. The loss of immigrant entrepreneurship to other countries is especially significant since recent work has found that immigrants of all skill levels were 80% more likely than U.S.-born citizens to start a business in the U.S. Moreover, immigrants were more likely to start a business at every business size, from small mom-and-pop shops all the way up to high-growth startups. And these immigrant-founded companies created 42% more jobs than U.S. citizen-founded companies. So if immigrants originally destined for the U.S. instead choose to go to Canada, for example, they end up creating new jobs for Canadians rather than for Americans. Immigrants also disproportionately positively contribute to innovation, which has historically given the U.S. a competitive edge relative to countries like China that do not attract or permit immigrants. A recent study found that immigrants who account for about 14% of the U.S. population are responsible for 36% of aggregate innovation in the U.S. Not only do immigrants patent more than U.S.-born workers, but they also increase U.S.-born workers' productivity by 13 percentage points due to increased collaboration between U.S.-born and immigrant workers and the recombination of diverse knowledge and ideas. Another study turns to history for a clear example of what happens to American innovation when immigration flows are restricted. Immigration quotas in the 1920s caused a 68% decline in patenting, in large part because Americans were less innovative without immigrants around. We risk repeating that history. Finally, My own work shows that businesses based in countries with more restrictive immigration laws are at a competitive disadvantage. They perform worse on average than firms in countries with more open immigration systems, both because they get less talent and because of the lost collaboration between US-born and immigrant workers. But I'm not the only one to show that access to immigrants affects business performance. For instance, other research focused on startups has shown that winning the H-1B lottery improves the likelihood of receiving venture capital funding and successfully going public. Similarly, when firms fail to obtain seasonal immigrant workers, it reduces their revenue and investment. In short, the ability to hire immigrants of all skill levels matters a lot for firm innovation and performance. The implications of the empirical evidence are clear. When we choose to not reform our outdated and restrictive immigration system, we hurt our competitiveness and economic dynamism, sending jobs, startups, investment, and innovation to countries that do recognize the economic benefits that immigrants bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We turn now to Mr. Beer. Welcome. Please proceed with your statement.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, Co-Chair Padilla, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For nearly half a century, the Cato Institute has produced original research showing that a freer, more lawful, and more orderly immigration system benefits Americans. Our view is simple. People are the ultimate resource. Only people can transform natural resources into human resources. And in a free country, they do just that. Immigrants are workers, inventors, investors, and entrepreneurs. They are contributors, not takers. The single most important economic challenge facing the United States is population decline. Half of America's counties are already losing population. Immigration alone is keeping the working age population from falling. By 2040, America's total population will be shrinking. You can't maintain infrastructure, businesses, or schools when consumers, parents, and workers disappear. Hospitals close, roads erode when people don't come. Social Security illustrates the massive scale of this demographic problem. The system is already short nearly 3 million workers that it needs to keep revenues above expenses. By 2035, it will be 30 million, and benefits will either be cut by 23% or, more likely, taxes will go up. America's aging workforce is contributing to an unprecedented labor shortfall. Nearly 10 million jobs have stood open per month over the last 2.5 years, costing the U.S. economy nearly $2 trillion. Note that the worker shortage is not just about a skills gap. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that nearly 70% of jobs in 2031 will not require a college degree. A thriving economy will need people of all types. Immigration isn't the singular answer, but it helps. It helps because immigrants work, expand the pie, and create new opportunities for Americans. According to the Cato Institute's 2023 update of the National Academy of Sciences' highly regarded 2016 report on the fiscal effects of immigration, immigrants generate nearly $1 trillion in taxes, nearly $300 billion more than they receive in benefits. Moreover, immigrants who enter as young adults have a net present value that is positive at every skill level over their lifetime. Immigrants counteract population decline and have created or preserved nearly $3 trillion in housing wealth for American households, predominantly in areas where housing prices are falling or were low. Immigrants work at higher rates at every skill level, and they work with Americans, not against them. Every worker is part of an economic ecosystem, depending on a vast army of other workers to make them productive. Immigrant caregivers let U.S. parents get jobs again. Landscaping workers create jobs for Americans as supervisors. When farmers in Iowa hire workers, they purchase equipment that creates jobs in manufacturing in South Carolina for Americans. Immigrants are primarily complements, not competitors. The problem is that America's immigration system isn't recognizing these benefits. We will next year keep out about 97% of the people trying to get green cards right now. As a result, the U.S. ranks in the bottom third of wealthy countries for immigrants per capita. Our situation is so bad that Congress isn't even trying to retain the immigrants we already have here right now. The 11 million or more without legal status, the 500 or so Afghans, Ukrainians, and others with temporary parole status, the 600,000 DACA recipients, the 1 million international students, the 1 million temporary skilled workers, and the children of those workers who lose their dependent status when they turn 21. All these people could or would be contributing more to America's future if they had a permanent lawful status in this country. We want them to invest in this country. America is losing our competitive edge. We went from accounting for the majority of the increase in the immigrant population worldwide in the 1990s to accounting for less than 7% of it from 2015 to 2020. Few countries can simply choose their demographic destiny. America is the greatest country on earth, and we can choose that destiny. And the immigrants who come here can help keep America the greatest country on earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beer. We now turn to Mr. Van Beek. Thank you so much for coming here and joining us.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, Senator Padilla, and members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story. My name is Lawrence Van Beek, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in Iowa, graduated from the University of Iowa, and I'm a software developer with an Iowa-based international company. I'm also a member of Improve the Dream and one of 250,000 young immigrants who face constant barriers in our legal immigration system that forces young people who were brought here legally, raised and educated here, to leave the country after turning 21. I am visiting today from Belgium, as I have already been forced out of my home of nearly 2 decades. Despite going to great lengths to follow every letter of U.S. immigration law, my ability to build a future in the only country I call home is obscured in red tape. And it has happened both as a child growing up here lawfully and as an adult trying to navigate the employment-based immigration system. I was born in the Netherlands, and in 2005, when I was 7 years old, my parents moved us to the United States in search of a better life after rising crime in our area. My family had already had deep roots in Iowa, dating back to shortly after World War II, when my grandmother, at age 16, started a correspondence with students attending a small farm school in Iowa City, and grew that connection over time, leading to the mayor of Iowa City dedicating September 9th, 1997 as Leni van Beek Day in her honor. When we settled in Iowa, my dad got the opportunity to start his own small jewelry business in North Liberty. Having grown up watching my parents become welcome members of the Iowa City community as they poured love and care into every piece of jewelry they made, I knew that this is where I wanted to stay. Growing up on the farm, I have fond memories of feeding horses, riding through the cornfields on a four-wheeler, picking sweet corn, and attending the Johnson County Fair with my family. I attended Mark Twain Elementary, where I was a crossing guard, having to make sure to take down and put up the American flag every afternoon and morning. While attending Iowa City High School, I represented my school at the Iowa Model UN conferences. I attended the University of Iowa, where I got my bachelor's degree in computer science and immersed myself in the typical American campus life and student organizations. Freshman year, the first hurdle in my immigration status became apparent. To graduate, I would need to switch from my status as a dependent on my parents' visa to an international student visa. My parents' visa allows them to operate a small business, hire American employees, and renew their status, but it does not have an attainable pathway to permanent residence or citizenship for them or dependents. So when I turned 21, I aged out. All of the years that I had spent growing up in this country were rendered useless by our immigration laws, and I was treated like a brand new immigrant coming here for the first time. My parents could never have imagined that America's immigration laws would allow them to lawfully build lives in their local communities while forcing their son to face challenges to continue staying in the country as an adult. After graduating, I began working full-time for Integrated DNA Technologies in Coralville, Iowa, under my F1 OPT status for college graduates, which I had for 3 years due to my STEM degree. I worked directly on software for the production of DNA assays with a wide range of medical usage, including during the height of the COVID pandemic. Despite my accomplishments and deep ties to my community, I was one of thousands of STEM professionals not selected by the randomized visa work lottery system over 3 attempts in 3 years. This meant that when my OPT expired in July 2022, I had to self-deport, or risk being in the United States with an expired status. I had to sell my car, condense my life down to 2 suitcases, leave my friends, coworkers, community, family behind, leave the country that I love, and go back to the Netherlands, a place I hadn't even visited in the 17 years since leaving. It was not my home. And on July 6, 2022, I saw the turmoil weigh on our family as it was split apart when my parents waved me, their only child, off at the airport. I told my dad that I would make the best of the situation. However, deep down, I knew that things could never be the same. My life had turned upside down and started over. 2 months after I was forced to leave, my father was diagnosed with kidney cancer. I could not be with him in the time that he needed me most. Imagine being their only child and not being able to be there for your parents when they have dedicated their entire life for the betterment of your American dream. Throughout all of this, my employer is actively working on my return. But the fact that I am coming here today from Belgium demonstrates that our system has failed. It failed me, my family, my community, and my employer. I now pay taxes and spend my money in Belgium, and I can't see my family and my true home nearly enough. This is not what the Founding Fathers intended for America. The U.S. is my home, and I want to live here and contribute to my community in Iowa. My story isn't unique. Every year, another 10,000 individuals like me who grew up in this country with lawful status are forced to leave. We are America's children. On top of this, thousands of other individuals are forced to take their talents and potentials to other countries who are happily welcoming them and their families. We need congressional action that creates a clear, attainable pathway for people like me to obtain permanent residence. Otherwise, our country will continue to waste its investments and the potential of immigrants who only want to help grow the country they love. The bipartisan America's Children Act, led by Senators Padilla and Paul, would be a great start as it permanently fixes the problem for people like me. For the U.S. to continue as a global leader, we cannot afford to squander the talents of people who have been shaped by American values and want to give back to the country that raised them. I am and always will be an American, even if the paperwork tells a different story. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Beek. Next is Mr. Rector, Dr. Rector. Is it? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it from here. Mr. or Doctor? Mr. Rector, please proceed.
The United States, if you look at the world, there are over 900 million people who would like to come and live in the United States. And if you think about open borders in that context, it's clear that open borders would transform the United States beyond any reasonable recognition of what it is. We've experimented with open borders now for about 3 years, and the consequences of that are very apparent. As the mayor of New York just recently said, that that New York is facing a crisis, a cost in state and city expenditures only of $6 billion a year. He said, quote, "This is coming to a neighborhood near you. Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to. I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City. The city we knew we are about to lose." And that is a microcosm of the United States, because with the open border illegal immigration crisis, our nation is a nation that we are about to lose, and it's directly a result of the policies implemented by President Biden. When Biden campaigned for the presidency, he said he would urge illegal immigrants to surge to the border, a remarkable statement. He then has set up a policy where when they reach the border, there is an open admission process in which almost all of them are automatically allowed into the states. And then he also promised and has delivered that once they arrive in the United States, unless they commit some type of serious crime, there will be absolutely no deportation for them. This is explicitly an open borders policy, even though they don't want to admit it. And as a result of this open borders policy, Biden did not get his expected surge of illegal immigration. He has generated an absolute tidal wave. In the months since Biden took office, there have been 5 million illegal immigrants who have crossed the border and taken up residence in the United States. This is more than twice the highest rate ever achieved in this before. And as a result of these 5 million illegal immigrants entering the country, we now have over 15 million illegal immigrants in the United States, and it continues to rise. As the mayor of New York said, there is no end in sight. This is a catastrophe that can only get larger and larger. If the current trends continue, we will have, within about 4 or 5 years, over 20 million illegal immigrants residing in the United States with no policy other than to grant them amnesty and full access to the U.S. welfare system. And what are the consequences of this? Well, fiscally, illegal immigrants, about half of them lack a high school degree historically. This means that of the 15 million we currently have here, the fiscal expenditures are about $150 billion a year. They pay about $50 billion in taxes. This creates a deficit of $100 billion a year. What's $100 billion a year? That's equivalent to a 75-cent tax on every gallon of gasoline sold in the United States. The National Academy of Sciences says that this type of low-skill immigrant, again, with close to half of them not having a high school degree, costs the U.S. taxpayer, net of any taxes these individuals pay in, $288,000 per person per year. When you take the current mass of them, that is $3.8 trillion over the course of a lifetime, not per year, over a lifetime. That's $3.8 trillion for the whole mass of them over the course of a lifetime, and that is just the current number. This population is going to go up, and these costs will simply become higher and higher. An additional impact of this is that when you bring in low-skill immigrants of this sort, and I have over 80 studies that I can provide the committee on this, you bring in this type of low-skill immigration, what it does is drive low-skill American workers, particularly minority workers, out of the labor force and drives down their wages. Typically, for every 10% increase in the low-skill immigrant population in an employment group, the wages go down by about 6%. And we have seen in our low-skill population largely static wages for decades now, and that is substantially due to the influx of low-skilled workers coming in to compete with them. Milton Friedman told us we cannot have open borders in a welfare state. We are now experimenting with that, and we are finding, as the mayor of New York has found, that that was exactly right.
Dr. Hira, please proceed.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, other distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify here today. It's both a professional honor, but it's personally very meaningful to me. I'm the son of 2 Indian immigrants. My late mother was a physician, and my late father was an engineer. My wife is also an immigrant from India, so it has a lot of personal meaning to me. I want to recognize Ranking Member Grassley's spearheading leadership on bipartisan reforms that would create a skilled immigration system that's fairer to guest workers, immigrants, and U.S. workers alike. S-979, the H-1B and L-1 Visa Reform Act of 2023, is co-sponsored by Senators Durbin and Sanders. It would yield, if passed, it would yield higher economic growth and reduce budget deficits. The title of this hearing is How Immigration Can Fuel Economic Growth and the Country's Competitive Advantage. But too often the immigration policy discussion conflates immigrants with guest workers. It's really important to make a clear distinction between the two. Immigrants are people who can stay in the U.S. permanently, whereas guest workers are temporary non-immigrants. Unlike immigrants, guest workers can only stay in the country under specific conditions and have very limited rights. As a result, every time Congress creates a new guest worker program, or as in the case of the OPT was created by the administrative state, you're creating a distinct market, a different labor market that operates distinctly and separately from our normal labor market. The rules that govern these guest worker programs are critical because they shape how that market behaves. We have not spent enough time, policymakers, but also academics and researchers, have not spent enough time scrutinizing the details. The details really matter in terms of what those rules are for guest worker programs, because you want to have a certain kind of behavior. Well, that behavior, in terms of the market, will be shaped by these rules. There are really two overarching principles for any guest worker program, whether it's here in the U.S. or in the UAE, whether it's for high-skilled programs like the H-1B or lower skilled for like the H-2B. Guest worker programs are supposed to fill labor market gaps where there's a real genuine labor shortage of U.S. workers. And really importantly, guest workers themselves must be protected because they're very vulnerable to exploitation. What the research shows, and not just research, but we can just look at the data, the U.S. government has really failed on both accounts, meeting both of those principles. And I'll just highlight the H-1B as the textbook example of this failure. The H-1B program was created and is intended to fill labor shortages for college-educated labor markets for jobs. Instead of filling those labor market gaps and labor shortages, it's instead widely used to hire cheaper indentured workers who are exploited to directly compete with American workers, and so they're substituting for those American workers, and to also subsidize the offshoring of U.S. jobs. Simply put, the H-1B visa is the outsourcing visa. I didn't call it the outsourcing visa. One of the Indian commerce ministers called the H-1B the outsourcing visa. It's widely exploited to offshore jobs, depress wages and working conditions, and it also fuels rampant wage theft from H-1B workers themselves. We just need to look at the government data on which firms are actually the largest H-1B employers. If you look at the top three, they are all IT staffing firms, one based in the US, Cognizant, and two based in India, Infosys and Tata Consultancy. They received an astonishing 350,000 approvals over 10 years. And for new workers, they received 87,000 new initial H-1B visas from the government. That 87,000 is enough to populate a mid-sized city. These three firms alone took 10%, or 1 in 10, of all of the CAP visas for new workers over the past 10 years, crowding out employers like Mr. Van Beek's, who are trying to go through the lottery system and trying to get H-1B visas. The reason's pretty simple. It's because these IT staffing firms, core to their business model, is being able to exploit the H-1B visa for lower wages and indenturing those workers, and it's highly profitable. It's extremely lucrative, and so it's mimicked across the sector by all these other firms. HCL, IBM, Deloitte are all doing these same kinds of things. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much. Let me start with Dr. Glennon, if I may. We often hear the argument that encouraging high-skilled immigrant engineers, technical people, entrepreneurs to locate in this country will allow them to compete with and displace American jobs and challenge the American economy. What is wrong with that argument?
Thank you. So there's two parts that are wrong with that argument. Both have to do with the demand side, right? So first of all, immigrants are job creators much more than they are job takers. So they're much more likely to start a company, which then creates jobs for Americans. The second piece that's wrong with that argument is that they serve as complements to US-born workers, right? And so if you look at, for example, the innovation data, right, they not only are producing more patents, but they're also actually making US inventors much more productive, right? They're helping US inventors create more patents and more impactful patents. And so it's actually these complementarities that are generating economic growth and innovation for the US as a whole.
Mr. Beer, could you take your quite compelling testimony and apply it to the issue of economic competition between the United States and China? During my opening statement, I put up a graphic that shows that in a high immigration scenario versus in a low immigration scenario, U.S. GDP changes quite dramatically. This is the lavender here is our high immigration, $47 trillion in 2050 GDP, and low immigration, it's only $33 trillion. That's a $14 trillion gap. If you would be good enough to make reference to that and apply your testimony to it.
Sure, absolutely. Absolute size absolutely matters. You want to have a large economy, a growing workforce, a growing consumer base, because that's where companies are going to want to invest. If we want to throw our weight around on the world stage, which of course we do, we want to open up markets, we want to have people appealing to us, not to communist China on issues like free speech, then we want to be the largest economy in the world. And immigration is really the only way that we're going to maintain that. I just want to flag one thing for the committee. The Department of Defense under the Trump administration in 2020 put out a report saying that today's education pipeline is not providing the necessary software engineering resources to meet the demand of the defense sectors. And the population of China is producing 8 times the number of STEM graduates than the United States is. So we are losing out in an enormous way on the high skill side of things and on the low skill side of things when it comes to immigration compared to China.
And just as a general question, can anyone offer a positive social benefit from Mr. Van Beek having to deport himself out of the United States? Is anybody here to defend that? For the record, not one hand has gone up from our panel. Mr. Van Beek, 7? Is that how old you were when you came to this country?
That's correct.
What grade did you first go into?
I went into 3rd grade, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Really good move to be throwing 3rd graders who've spent their entire lives in this country out. There is a way to fix it. I tried to do this in the NDAA last year, and that is to open a STEM exemption from the visa caps, which I assume would get around Mr. Rector's antipathy to low-skilled workers, as he calls them. STEM is pretty high-skilled, I would think. And unfortunately, we were unable to get that done, but I very much hope that we will try again, and perhaps on the basis of the testimony here, have more success. With that, let me turn to my distinguished ranking member, Senator Grassley of Iowa.
Yeah. Mr. Rector, I think you touched a little bit on my first question, so I'll give you a chance to elaborate. Your research and analysis cost of illegal immigrants to local, state, and federal government has consistently shown fiscal burden to the U.S. taxpayer. What types of costs can government leaders from New York City Mayor Eric Adams to small-town mayors in Massachusetts expect to face?
About 2/3 of the fiscal costs go to the federal government, but the other third goes to state and local communities. Starting with health care, they have to spend a lot on that. The average cost of education in the United States for children is $15,000 per child per year. Most illegal immigrants have kids. Someone has to pay the cost of educating those kids. That's borne by local governments. It's certainly not being paid for by the illegal immigrant themselves that has an 8th grade education. And then you have the routine expenditures of police and sewers and so forth and so on. That's why even if you abolish the welfare system, illegal immigrants would still be in fiscal deficit. They would still receive much more in expenditures than they pay in taxes. Today, they get about $3 of government expenditures for every dollar of taxes they pay. And I'm talking taxes comprehensively. I've got in our calculations, as in the National Academy of Sciences, we have excise taxes, cigarette taxes, so forth, everything. They do pay taxes, but they receive far more in benefits.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I have 3 articles from the New York Times that I'd like to put in the record, and these articles deal with costs to governments.
Without objection.
Thank you. Dr. Hara, we have heard this morning from other witnesses that the solution to the problem in our immigration system, specifically H-1B, is to just increase the number of visas given out each year. Is that a reasonable solution? And explain why or why not.
Mr. Grassley, thank you for the question. It's a bad idea. More is not better. Better is better. The solution to the H-1B program is contained in your bill, which is raising wages and selecting workers who are better. Right now, the top firms like Cognizant, Infosys, and Tata are not bringing in H-1B workers because they bring any special skills. In fact, they have lower skills. They've all been involved in scandals where U.S. workers directly train their replacements at these companies, and we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of workers. So we should be shooting for better, not more.
Dr. Hara, you helped work with Durbin and me on our H-1B bill. Given your study of the program, this visa program, over the years, can you tell us the top 2 changes that you would make to the program that would have the most immediate and impactful improvements in the program? And are those changes in S-979?
Thank you, Mr. Grassley. Yes, they are contained in the bill, and the top 2, I would say, are wages. Why are we setting wages so low? You're inducing and incentivizing firms to bring in lower paid H-1B workers. The second top one, and I think the bill has a tremendous number of good features, the second one I would point to is that it ensures that U.S. workers have a legitimate shot at the jobs and the job openings. Right now, contrary to conventional wisdom and misunderstanding, people think that you have to demonstrate that no U.S. worker is available. In fact, before hiring an H-1B, in fact, employers can bypass the U.S. labor market altogether, bring in H-1Bs, import H-1B workers, and even displace U.S. workers with H-1B workers. So it would solve at least those 2 problems. The other thing I'd add is that some of these things can be done administratively by the Departments of Labor and Homeland Security, but the statutory fixes would be permanent ones.
Yeah. Mr. Rector, my last question, comparing your recently updated fiscal burden data to your previous research, did you find particular changes in the data that surprised you or were notable?
The absolute magnitude of the growth of the illegal immigrants. So this is close to 2 million people a year coming in, being admitted and being released into the United States with no pretext of removing them ever or deporting them. We've never had anything like that, and this will accelerate the cost. It's going so fast that the Census Bureau can't even keep up with these changes. It's absolutely unprecedented in the history of this country.
Thank you, Senator Grassley, excuse me. Want to thank witnesses once again for your testimony, and in particular, Mr. Van Beek, for sharing your story with us today. My heart goes out to you, and it's an outrage that you were forced to leave your home and family behind for another country that you barely knew, as you explained, after living here for so many years. It's a significant failure of our immigration system to not consider the fate of the children of temporary visa holders whose parents have applied for a green card, but again, this is a lawful mechanism, but they're stuck waiting in years-long backlogs. And children like you, and there's many, many throughout the country, at risk of aging out from protection of their parents' status. So I too, similar to what Senator Whitehouse mentioned, had a fix. We have an idea. We have a solution here. It's called the America's Children Act, which I hope we're able to pass in time to help other people in circumstances very similar to yours. So we will continue to press this legislation to address the needs of thousands of others, what we call documented dreamers in this situation. Can you describe, Mr. Van Beek, your experience regarding the challenges and uncertainty that your family encountered due to your immigration status, especially leading up to your self-deportation?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. The uncertainty was kind of up to the last minute almost, with my employer kind of the last hope being the H-1B visa lottery of 2022. We didn't really know until about March, April, that I was not selected. And with my OPT expiring in July, there was no other status that I could, transition into. It was basically then a rush to figure out how I'm going to move back to the country and where I was going to live. So I, did apartment searching online. Wonderful thing, the internet sometimes. That made it a little bit easier, but still, I didn't know what I was going into. And
I imagine it was stressful for your family.
For sure.
And can imagine for your employer, very hard to replace a worker like you.
It is, yeah. We just previously to that, during the COVID pandemic, had to, hire a number of workers as our company is growing significantly.
So again, just wanted to underscore the very real people impact on this in terms of your family, but the economic impact in terms of an employer. Next question. We heard in testimony today that immigrants boost innovation and even increase productivity of U.S.-born workers where they are present. And we know that numerous immigrant-founded startups have grown to become some of America's most successful companies. As of 2023, nearly 45% of Fortune 500 companies, including Costco, Apple, and Moderna, were founded by immigrants or their children. Those are facts. But despite the widespread evidence that immigrants are significant contributors to the U.S. economy, our current immigration laws do not provide a viable visa option for them to start a new venture, leading many potential founders to move to competing countries with less outdated and restrictive immigration laws, again, causing America to fall behind. Ms. Glennon, I know you touched on this in your testimony. Can you just expand a little bit more? What is the economic impact of these businesses and jobs moving elsewhere, and what does that mean for the American people?
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned in my testimony, immigrants are 80% more likely to form startups, and that's actually despite the fact that we don't have any pathway for them to form startups currently, right? So under something like the H-1B program, there's no ability to form a startup. Under any of the other programs, short of permanent residency, there's no way to form a startup. And so what I found in my research is that many of these constrained would-be founders who had moved to the U.S., wanted to form a startup in the U.S., had to leave and go somewhere else. In my study, that was Canada. Yeah. And that meant that those jobs that they're creating go to Canadians. The innovation that they are creating then goes to the Canadian economy. The consumption that is occurring goes to Canada as well.
So take that as maybe a recommendation you have to create a startup visa. In addition to that, can you comment on the impact of expanding employment-based visa numbers or lifting the country caps that are in place, and from an economic standpoint, what that would mean?
Yeah. A big part of the problem right now is the uncertainty, right, which we heard about from Mr. Van Beek. So if you are an immigrant and you want to consume, or you want to form a startup, or you want to invest, if you don't know if you can actually stay, then you're really limited in how much you can do that. And so it's really depressing how much immigrants are actually able to contribute to our economy. And the same goes for businesses, right? If they're not sure that they can hire the immigrants that they need, then they're going to be also more wary about investing.
Thank you. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Acting Mr. Chair. It's such an interesting conversation because in my home state of Indiana, crossroads of America, the biggest manufacturing state per capita, and really in every nook and cranny has a strong immigrant presence. But I think what we've got to get to the bottom of, since everyone wants something to work better, is how do we get there? And the sad thing about this place, you got to get 60 senators to agree to it, even on issues that have so much merit. I, back in March of 21, went with 16, 17 other Republicans down to the border. And when you see that up close, you see the humanitarian issues involved there. I travel, visit all 92 counties, hear the same thing, workforce, workforce, workforce. And we know how immigrants become the entrepreneurs, startup businesses and all that. So how do we get to where we kind of can solve the issue? And listening to the Border Patrol, because I think it all starts down there on the southern border, the whole issue of comprehensive immigration reform, so you don't have people coming in risking life and limb when there's a need for much more legal immigration. How do you get there? Well, they were very clear. They said in the highest traffic areas, you had to have something physically in place to help them out that was going to reduce the flow. And then you do need to throw everything at it in terms of technology and additional labor resources so that we get back to a secure border. Then I think you cascade quickly into solutions. When one side of the aisle has chosen to get rid of the idea of having a secure border, I don't think that syncs up with the majority of Americans, and especially the legal immigrants that have come into this country. All the stories I've just briefly heard, I hear repeats of it. We do so many issues involving immigration in our own constituent service back in Indiana. But how do you get to where we start solving the problem? I think you're going to have security there based upon the experts who tell us what needs to be done. And then you start looking at how you solve all the related problems. And I think most Republicans would agree with what I've just said. But until you abandon the current policies that seem to promote completely an open border, it puts in peril the ones that want to come into this country, and it causes chaos once you're here. So I could dwell and go on, but I think there's going to be general agreement with that on our side of the aisle, and I hope on the other side of the aisle, because immigrants built this country. How could we be in such a complex, confusing situation that we have now in front of us? Secure the border, put the resources there, look what was working pre-Biden administration. A lot of the aspirations that the Biden administration wants, they're aspirational because it's not based upon a secure border. I'm going to look at a practical matter. The country's borrowing 30 cents on every dollar we spend currently. That's going to be a huge burden for the next generation and their kids. And when you bring folks into the country that aren't prepared even to blend into the workforce, it puts a further stress on what's been the biggest dereliction in this country, that politically we're willing to borrow from our kids and grandkids for our latest and greatest political idea, none of them of which have been knocking it out of the park. Mr. Rector, I'd like to ask you, would you be able to quantify in some way Social Security and Medicare, the two systems that structurally are breaking the budget that we need to roll our sleeves up and try to fix? What happens financially? How much would it cost? Can you put a number on if you try to integrate that into a system that's currently going broke?
The reality is that Social Security not only transfers from the resources from the young to the old, but it also transfers resources from the affluent to the non-affluent. So when you bring in, for example, someone with an 8th grade education, although we'll always hear, oh, they put some money into Social Security, they get vastly more back out of it than they put in. It's obviously, and plus you can't just look at Social Security in isolation, because these individuals are also taking all these other resources, so that they effectively are usually going to receive over their lifetimes about $3 of government expenditures for every dollar of taxes they put in. And again, I'm very comprehensive in the way I count the taxes that they pay. They don't pay much income tax, but they do pay a lot of sales tax, things like that at the local level. It's only here in Washington that you would actually think that someone that has an 8th grade education is going to put more into government in taxes than they take back out in benefits. It doesn't matter whether that person is born in Tennessee or born in Guatemala. If you bring in people with very low education levels, they will access the welfare benefit system. That's clearly what the National Academy of Sciences shows. And then they impose massive long-term tax burdens on the taxpayer. Illegals currently, I would say, are going to cost the country just trillions and trillions of dollars in net. You have to bring in higher skilled people. Individuals who have a college education do pay more in taxes than they receive in benefits. Those who do not do exactly the opposite.
And I think that just shows how difficult the problem is, because we hear it from the entire spectrum in terms of what we need to do. But if it's not based upon a secure border that we were starting to put in place, we even exacerbate the problem for those that want to come into the country and for how they're going to make a life here once they get here. And look at what was working: secure the border, roll up our sleeves, fix the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Braun. Before turning to Senator Lujan, appreciate Mr. Rector acknowledge there's other perspectives on the answer to your question and other methodologies. Let me ask Mr. Beer if you might chime in here on the question. Social Security was a specific example and the impact of immigrants on the economy.
Well, look, the fundamental problem with Social Security is there are not enough workers paying into the system to support the retirees, and that problem is going to get worse. More workers would benefit. That's what the Social Security trustees say. The Congressional Budget Office agrees with that perspective. I fundamentally do agree that there needs to be other reforms to the system to make it financially sound, but we have the analysis to show that more workers is going to increase the number of taxes going in and improve the fiscal situation. On the whole, if you look at all the taxes, all the benefits, we've done it. We have this huge report right here that you can read that looks into this. And the biggest set of taxes that Mr. Rector is not including in his analysis is the taxes that business pay on capital when they hire workers. So every time you hire workers, you almost always are investing more capital in the business, and that is the biggest effect, in trillions of dollars increase in capital as a result of immigration.
And do you believe a secure border has to be something that you'd have to have in place to then go after what you're looking at?
Well, I think legal immigration is critical to having a secure border. When I've talked to Border Patrol officials, they say, look, we don't want these people who are coming for peaceful purposes to be crossing here. We should have a legal process for them to come.
Thank you. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everyone for being with us today. Thank you to the panel for making time to be here. I believe immigration is a fundamental part of our country. Immigrants not only enhance the culture of our communities, but they come to the U.S. looking to work hard, to make things better, to create opportunities for those that have started businesses here. And, the line of questioning that I just heard, and one of the responses, we have a workforce shortage in America. Especially in the agricultural communities, in places that are packaging produce and poultry and pork and beef. I want to see more people come to the United States that have had the opportunity to go through apprenticeship programs or go to college. But there's a lot of people that do very well that work in all these other spaces. When I travel to every country in the union and I speak to people where there's a shortage, they tell me about the needs they have. It takes people from all backgrounds. Now, my father was a welder. He was an iron worker. Did not have a college degree. Became the Speaker of the House in the state of New Mexico, the longest serving speaker in our state. When he was Speaker, he was the only blue-collar serving speaker in the country. He had a lot to offer America and a lot to offer New Mexico. I hope we just step back and we understand the needs that exist in our country and find a way to get there. I appreciate the question that was asked by my colleague, Mr. Braun, about border security. One of the stats that I am astonished with is that less than 10% of vehicles that come into the United States on the southern border are screened. It takes money to make investments and bring technology so that we get 100% vehicles screened. And not just coming into the United States, but leaving the United States. So that we can get our hands on all the bad stuff coming in and all the guns going out. But it takes investment, it takes money, and we have to get there in that place. So as we have this comprehensive conversation about border security, I certainly hope that there's a willingness to make investments so that we're able to see everything coming in and going out. And it's not just the southern border. The rates of bad things coming into the United States from Canada is horrific. The stuff that comes in from the water ports is just as bad in these big shipping containers that travel around the world. Why aren't we screening those? And why are we helping allied countries around the world who also send goods to the United States to screen their incoming and their outgoing? I'm just beside myself with some of this. But to the point today, Dr. Glennon, is it true that the Center for American Progress analyzed and provided that providing a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants to the U.S. would bolster the United States GDP over the years and create over 400,000 new jobs?
That's my understanding. There's important complementarities between low-wage workers and higher-wage workers in particular. So, for example, we have a shortage of childcare providers, right? And there's work showing that when you allow more undocumented immigrants or more lower skill immigrants in, then it actually allows women to enter the workforce because they no longer are restrained in their ability to do so.
I appreciate Dr. Glennon. I had some constituents come visit with me today from southern New Mexico who were sharing with me the problem with trying to find healthcare staff right now, childcare staff. They built new facilities, but it's hard for them to get them staffed up. So I appreciate what you focused in on there. I'm reminded, Mr. Chairman, as my time that it had a positive score from what it would do to strengthen the GDP in America. With all the challenges that we have, maybe we start by dusting that one off and get that one passed. And let's move from there and see if we can find a path forward. But I certainly appreciate this important hearing, the testimony that's been provided, the testimony that will still be submitted. I have a lot of questions. I'll make sure that I get them in so I'm respectful of my colleagues. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing and for everyone coming in today.
Thank you, Senator. And now we will turn to Senator Graham, who I said at the outset when he was not here has been such an important figure in the bipartisan conversations that we've had on immigration over many years. Senator Graham.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really good topic. Let's see if we can find some common ground to the panel. How many of you believe that the southern border is secure? How many of you believe it's not secure? 4 out of 5? What about you, Ms. Tyra?
I don't know enough about how that would be defined to pass judgment on it.
Well, we've had over 5 million people come in illegally. So, anyway. I think it's unsecure, and we need to make it secure. Now, let's talk about immigration. What percentage of agricultural workers, the people go harvest the crops and do all the agricultural stuff, are undocumented illegal immigrants? Does anybody know?
50%.
Okay. Does anybody doubt what he said? All right. If those 50% went away tomorrow, what would happen?
A lot of farms would go bankrupt. There would be a massive shift in trade practices, so we'd start importing a lot more food from abroad.
Anybody disagree with that? Yeah, please.
Farm labor is unique in its reliance on immigration, but if you look at all the other sectors of the economy, types of occupations, where
Well, let's just stick with farm labor right now. Do you agree that, I think it's closer to 70%? Do you agree that a substantial percentage of people in the agricultural business, workers in the field, are undocumented illegal immigrants?
they're certainly immigrants, and probably a lot of them are illegal.
Yeah, so I guess here's my point. That's just one industry. There are a bunch of others. Meat packing. Have you ever been into a meat packing plant? Has anybody ever been to a meat packing plant? You ought to go. I don't think you'll stay. Most people working in a meat packing plant are immigrants. My point is, let's make this a win-win. Let's stop illegal immigration. Let's go to merit-based immigration. You agree with that, Mr. Rector?
I think that the problem is, the issue here that I would state is, we used to have this rhetoric that there are jobs that Americans won't do, and you've isolated two of them. That is,
Well, do you believe there are jobs American won't do, or is that just rhetoric?
I think the two that you isolated that's probably about right. But all the other jobs that Americans allegedly won't do, more than half the workers are actually U.S.-born citizens, and the wages in those industries have remained basically flat for decades.
Because people are paying illegal immigrants under the table.
Partly. It's also, we always talk about these labor shortages, but if you look at the below median income in the United States, it really hasn't gone up in constant dollars for decades. That is not an indication of a chronic labor shortage.
Well, if you have a business, you're having a hard time getting workers. Restaurants. Every restaurant in South Carolina's number one issue, I can't find people to work. Part of it's we paid people too much not to work. And the other part is people sort of moved on in the economy. Mr. Heyer, you're the H-1B advocate here?
I'm not sure I would call myself an advocate.
Do you want more H-1B visas? Or
No.
you want less?
I've argued for a better system. Right now, just to give you an example, we had 750,000 applications submitted for 85,000 slots this year. And instead of picking the best of that 750,000, picking the 85,000 top ones, they chose to pick them randomly, by random.
I am with you.
That doesn't make any sense. It's irrational.
Okay, do you think we should have more visas available in this space?
No, not under the current system. It has to be reformed.
Well, let's say you reform the system.
Well, it's a hypothetical. It depends on what reform.
Do we have enough?
Could we do it better? Yes, we could do it
My
better.
question is, are we generating enough workers in our own country to fill these jobs?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, why do we need a visa program?
We don't need one as it's currently constructed.
Well, are you arguing that we don't need an H-1 visa program at all?
I think we should favor immigration over guest worker programs. I think we've ended up relying on guest worker programs.
I don't mean to belabor the point.
If we need workers,
I'm asking you a fairly simple question. In this space, employers tell me that without immigration, they'd have a hard time filling the workforce. Because people are not graduating in our colleges with the skill sets at the levels necessary. Is that a false statement they're giving me?
I think it's a misleading one, yeah. If we
Okay.
want to look at whether there's a shortage in STEM, and you can look at even in software development, what would you look at? We have a market. You look at the price, the wages, and wages
Yeah.
have been flat. They haven't gone up. So there isn't any shortage.
Mr. Byer, do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with it at all. Unemployment in software development is below 2%. We've seen massive increases in the number of U.S.-born workers, 150% increase since 2006 in the U.S.-born software developer worker population in the United States. So there hasn't been any displacement. There's no unemployment. The numbers are going up. There's just not enough workers to go around.
I'll end on this, and thank you for indulging me. I've been following this for decades. We don't have a rational legal immigration system. Our population is declining. It is not growing. If you know anything about the American economy, the number one problem most employers have is finding reliable workers. If you deported all illegal immigrants in the agricultural space, we'd all starve. That doesn't justify illegal immigration. It means we need to reform the system to make it a win-win. When it comes to the H-1B world, I am convinced our education system's not producing enough in this area, and you need immigration to fill in the gap, but it needs to be what Dr. Heyer says, rational and merit-based. So you'll never convince me that our immigration system is working, because it's not. And the problem is that we need to bring people into our country, Mr. Chairman, from all over this world based on merit. And if we don't get a hold of this, the population decline, the number of people affected by drugs and inability to work is going up. We have a recruiting problem in the military because most people of a military service age are not able to serve. So to deny that immigration is not going to be the lifeblood of the future economy is a mistake. To say the current system works is an equal mistake. Thank you for having this hearing.
Thank you very much, Senator Graham. Senator Scott is our final witness of this hearing, unless someone else arrives at the hearing. Just general notice to anybody who plans to attend that it will wrap with Senator Scott, and you have his 5 minutes to get here. Okay. Senator Scott, please proceed.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks for holding the hearing. Mr. Rector, in the last 2 years, how many people, first of all, I come from an immigration state. You know, I've come from Florida, so we have a lot of, primarily Latin America, but some Eastern Europe, but a lot from Latin America. So, our economy is, over the last, especially 50 years, a lot of it's been developed based on legal immigration from Cuba, Venezuela, and then, of course, American citizens have come from places like Puerto Rico. So, in the last 2 years, how many people have come into our country legally? And how many people have come in illegally?
Equal. I know illegally, it's been 5 million people. We know that by looking at the encounters that result in an admission to the country. It's absolutely unprecedented. And this discussion is a little distorted because we talk about needing STEM engineers and things like that. They're not STEM engineers or PhDs with electronics engineering coming across the border here. All of that immigration historically is very, very low educated, and it is not going to produce technological change or anything. Many of these people have an 8th grade education, and what they actually do, in my perspective, is to push out the lowest skill American workers, particularly minority workers, right out of the workforce, and there's a massive literature that indicates that.
So you think there's been in the last 2 years, about 5 million legal
Yes.
and
No,
5 million illegal?
I believe so. I know the illegals. I haven't.
You don't know, does anybody know the legal number of people who have come here legally in the last 2 years?
In the last 2 years?
Yeah.
We've awarded about 2.1 million green cards.
For 2 years, so about.
For 2 years.
Yeah, okay, so 2.1 have come here legally and 5 million illegally. So if you come here legally, what benefits does the government give you versus if you come here illegally? Does anybody know? Mr. Rector?
Yeah, the legal immigrants after 5 years are eligible for the welfare system, 90 different means-tested programs. They also are eligible for Social Security and Medicare. But that's a little illusory because the welfare programs primarily have eligibility through children. Illegal immigrants have children, they get in the welfare state. So, and basically we're promising amnesty, which most of the members of Congress, or at least on the left side, want amnesty. That would give the illegals eligibility to absolutely everything.
But just, let's go back. So if you come here legally,
Yeah,
is there a cost to other taxpayers?
absolutely. Again, the simplest thing to
So
understand.
it's just on the legal?
Just on the legal,
What would be the average cost to an American citizen if somebody comes here legally?
It's a couple $10,000 a year, depending upon the education level. Again, the simplest thing to understand is if you bring in someone with a college education, they're going to pay more in taxes than they take out in benefits. If you bring in somebody with a 10th grade education, it's exactly the opposite. Over the course of a lifetime, they're going to take out about $3 of benefits for every dollar of taxes they pay.
Okay. So if you come here legally, right now,
That's legal or
if you
illegal.
come here legally, 2.1 million people came here legally. Let's just take it for, they come here. They come here legally, they get their green card. Do they cost us money?
Yes.
Are they productive citizens day one?
The welfare system is designed to support people who work, okay? So they, in fact, do work, but they also receive enormous amounts of benefits. That's the nature of the welfare state.
Do
So-
the people that come here illegally get more benefits?
No, they get slightly less, so they're actually slightly less expensive to the taxpayer. But the bottom line is a person with a 10th grade education, 11th grade education, we redistribute income to that person very strongly, whether they're born in Kentucky or whether they
So let me
come
ask you a
from
question.
abroad.
So what you see in the news is places like New York are saying that all these illegal immigrants have come up there, and now there's housing and hotels, and they're giving food vouchers and things like that. So a legal citizen doesn't get, if somebody comes here with a green card doesn't
Absolutely
get
not.
that.
New York City is a little extreme because they have a right to shelter there. But the bottom line is, again, I've studied the welfare system and what I call the broader transfer system for my entire career. If you have people that are less skilled, we support them. We don't require them to pay much in taxes. We give them lots of benefits from welfare, Social Security, education for the kids, all of which is free, all of which has to be paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. And when you bring in that type of individual through either illegal or legal immigration, it puts enormous fiscal pressures on the rest of the taxpayers.
Okay. So so nobody knows that number is if you came here legally, what it costs us versus if somebody came here legally. Nobody knows that number. There's never been a study.
Yes, I can give you that number. I've done that study.
Okay.
And it's about 50% higher if you're legally holding education constant, okay, because the illegals do not get means-tested welfare to the same degree.
Sure.
The group,
Have you ever done it? Have you ever seen anything on this? Has there anybody ever done a study on, like, take the 2.1 million people, okay?
I think the witnesses are better positioned to answer the question.
yes, Senator, I have done
But
that
have you ever,
study.
you have? Okay, I'd like to see it, because
Absolutely.
here's the way I look at it. It's not fair to the person that comes here legally, right? It's completely unfair to somebody who busts their butt, comes to the legal process, because first off, it's not free. It costs them money. My office does a lot of this in Florida, as you would expect. And we help a lot of people go through the process that have a right to be here. They have a right to be here, but they don't know how the process works. And then the lawyers, it's shocking how much these people are paying. So that's one thing. But I'd like to see a study of that. But first off, I think it's completely unfair if somebody comes through the process, then somebody comes here legally. Second, it would be nice to know what the cost of the shelter and all this stuff is, because that does cost us, and all of us are going to pay this in taxes. And then the other question I have is, it has to impact, and I don't know where the number, where you limit it, but it has to impact jobs. I mean, if there's way more people in the job market.
There is a very extensive literature on the impact of low-skill immigration on low-skill American workers, particularly low-skill black male workers, okay? And I know of 83 studies of that I have read and studied.
Do the rest of you agree with that? Do you guys agree with that? You don't think that?
But the bottom line is 9 out of 10 of those studies show that there's a significant wage loss effect when you bring in low-skill immigrant workers to compete with those low-skill American workers. It's just, the literature is overwhelming. It's just overwhelming, and it's common sense. It's what economics tells us.
We are beyond the senator's time, but I did see Mr. Beer reaching for his microphone, and he was spoken over by Mr. Rector, so let me give him a chance to add his response to the general question asked by Senator Scott.
If you look at when we saw the greatest wage growth in the United States for the non-college educated population, it was from the 1950s through the 1970s, when the labor force growth for that population was 3 times what it is now, and since the 1980s. So the idea that we're seeing more labor force growth, more labor force competition for this population is totally untrue. In fact, that population is in decline, and we need workers to fill these types of jobs. We talked about manufacturing, talked about meat processing, talked about farm workers. There are jobs, and in fact, there are far more job openings than there are unemployed people in the United States right now. If you want a job, I can find you a job, no problem.
Yeah, it would, well, logically you would say that if there's more workers, it's going to impact my ability to get a job. Just a kid growing up in a poor family in a poor neighborhood, that's what you would say, right? I think that's logical. Now, there might be other factors that are going to grow your economy faster. But I think the other thing we're dealing with is the fact that we have now a labor participation rate, and we've got 100 million people in our country that are of working age that are now not working. And we got to, all these things, it's not like just one thing we're going to fix. We got to fix immigration, and we got to get people back to work. And it's because it's not going to work if we don't. So.
Again, I saw Mr. Beer trying to respond, if you don't mind letting him.
Yeah, just the logical point, yes, when more people come in, they increase the supply of labor, but they also increase the demand for labor. So if I can hire a worker on my farm, I'm buying equipment that worker is going to use, and that's increasing demand for workers in manufacturing. I could give you countless examples. In the H-2B visa lottery, when the losers who don't get the visas don't create more jobs for Americans, the ones who win the lottery create more jobs for Americans.
So it's, I'm pro-immigration. I'm pro-immigration. Okay.
I know.
I'm pro-immigration.
Yeah.
I just think we've got to figure out, I think we have to do 2 things. We have to get Americans back to work, and 2, we have to figure out how we incentivize, create a system where we get people to want to come here to work and not be dependent. Because, I mean, I think we have to do both of those things. And there has to be limits. I mean, you can't say 100 million people. If all of Guatemala comes tomorrow, they might be wonderful people, but we couldn't afford that.
If I could give another historical example.
Thank you. Well, let me wrap up at this point. We're 5.5 minutes over the senator's time. I think if there's one thing that this hearing demonstrates, is that there is plenty to disagree over on the broad issue of immigration and border security. But it does seem that, as Senator Graham said, there is also common ground within that broad range. We easily achieved common ground on the notion that Mr. Van Beek's situation contributes 0 value to our country and should be fixed. And I did not hear any rebuttal of the numbers we've been operating under, which is that a low immigration future runs us to a $33 trillion economy by 2050. A high immigration economy runs us to a $47 trillion economy by 2050. And our current trajectory is 37 trillion. So we're not trending towards the stronger economy. We're trending towards the weaker, low immigration economy. And put against that is the estimation that, well, China's economy always may blow up a bit, but at the current trend, they're headed for a $50 trillion economy. So if you take the competition with China seriously, we're just a close second to them if we do our best work on this. So what I hope is that we can work off that what I hope is a rock-solid base of common ground that expanding lawful immigration, which I would argue means including law-abiding undocumented workers, will yield enormous economic rewards for our country, which will benefit, as I said, rising tide lifts all boats. If the ranking member or Senator Lee appear, they'll be offered the chance to offer a closing remark as well. Them not being here, I'll offer Senator Padilla a chance for a closing remark. If anybody, my co-chair, with much appreciation for his work on this, if there are pending questions, if anybody has questions they'd like to ask the witnesses by way of questions for the record, we'll want them in by noon tomorrow. And if the witnesses would indulge us by responding promptly to those so we can get responses back, I would be grateful. Our staff will be pursuing that with you to make sure that that is done. I'm grateful to you all, and I will let Senator Padilla close us out. Thank you.
Just want to take a moment to once again thank Chairman Whitehouse and Ranking Member Grassley and all the staff who made today's hearing possible and really important, not just to help members further understand the deep economic benefits of immigration in the United States of America, but for Americans at home to understand the fundamental difference between the headlines they see each and every day and the reality of what immigrants mean to our nation. Dozens and dozens of empirical studies have found that immigration benefits our economy. Immigration benefits not just immigrant workers, immigration benefits American workers. And it would be smart to listen to the economists and business leaders who are sounding the alarm on our labor shortage. And it's astonishing to hear some of my Republican colleagues saying that their primary objective is to get Americans back to work. We have historic, record low unemployment, and we still have significant workforce shortages in a number of sectors. In addition to that, we have a decline in our population growth rate. So as I mentioned before, meaningful immigration reform could lead to 3.2 million new jobs in America over the next decade and $1 trillion added to our economy. Who wouldn't want that? From healthcare to business, STEM to agriculture, immigrants have been and remain key to our national security and economic prosperity. That's right, economic prosperity and national security. By refusing to act on immigration reform, solutions we know we need, by refusing to have constructive conversations about the border while also trying to improve legal pathways to immigration, Republicans are holding our economy back and threatening our global standing. Their unwillingness to work with us means foreign competitors will continue to gain an advantage on us. And it means that we're losing out on the talent that could be coming to America to create jobs through the next world-changing startup, to discover the next life-saving medication, or even just to become the next great Little League coach or neighbor who contributes to the community. There are many steps we could take right now to start to chip away at this outdated system. Solutions like passing the America's Children Act to keep the children of long-term visa holders like Lawrence at home here in America where they belong. By expanding the supply of green cards and eliminating per-country visa caps to help reduce wait times and backlogs in reuniting families and fostering more innovation and growth in America at the same time. We can make sure that international and undocumented students can access and complete higher education in the United States and enter our workforce, not pushing them out to take their talents and skills and education elsewhere. We can and should update the existing registry cutoff date for the first time in almost 40 years so that millions of immigrants who are already living here, already working here, already contributing to the success of the United States can live freely without fear of an uncertain future. And we can make progress by passing my bill, the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, to create a pathway to citizenship. Not automatic, but a pathway to citizenship for the workers who the United States government deemed essential during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd argue they were essential before the pandemic and will continue to be essential long after the pandemic is officially over, but who worked so hard to keep us safe, healthy, and fed every day. Mr. Chair, at some other opportunity, I'd engage either these witnesses or other experts with the question of what the impact would be on our food supply chain, the cost of fruits and vegetables, if we do not have the immigrants that we do in the agricultural sector.
We actually had some testimony on that during an exchange between Senator Graham and Mr. Beer.
Excellent. I'm sorry I missed it, but we'll replay the tape. But at the end of the day, we need to look past the partisan games and understand that no one wins when we continue to fail to reform our immigration system. The future of our economy, for those who come here for a better life and for American citizens, depends on our ability to come together to fix this outdated and broken system. I look forward to working with my colleagues to do exactly that. Thank you again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Padilla. The hearing is adjourned. I am grateful to the witnesses for your participation and your testimony.